Light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. There are so many difficult interpersonal actions of all sorts going on these days. I suppose in some sense it's kind of like the quote from the movie The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, when Sean Connery's character makes the comment, perhaps you're too young to realize this, but the world is always in some kind of peril. Because someone comes to him asking his help, saying, the world's in peril, and he says, the world is always in some kind of peril. Yes, but that doesn't take the edge off of it when we're standing very close to a present time of transition. And there seems to be transition going on all around the world these days. Violent conflicts, peaceful transitions, a certain small group of people trying to maintain whatever they have, and yet because everything is so interconnected, there isn't really any way to be immune to it. At some point, whatever transition the world is going through is going to beat a path to your door. In some ways, I suppose I embody those sorts of transitions, being in one sense a timeless sort of perspective and person and a ministerial sort of presence, and yet there are things about me that go back to the Renaissance times in terms of costuming, and things about me and my ritual garb that are very updated and forward-thinking, artistically avant-garde, one might say. The sort of edginess that is challenging, and yet once one understands the symbolism behind each part of my costume, there's really nothing all that original or sensational about it. If anything, I suppose it's the combination that I'm presenting. But this show really isn't about me anyway. And from time to time I do explain different symbolisms of my ritual garb and face, and my face paint and so forth. There's symbolism behind every detail, so it takes a bit of time to go into all that. But the point of this show is to explore all the questions that were contained within the introduction to the show and more. Whatever one can wonder about, whatever one can ask, that there is something that is humanity and there is something that is divine, and the two should be in good relationship, I think is pretty much the foundation of spirituality. But what form and expression that takes varies across diverse languages and times and cultures. And I don't know that we need to argue about the forms so much, as long as we're engaged in the process. By definition, that which is God is beyond human comprehension. For an atheist, it may be simply the amazing, astonishing even, balance of the universe, as one thing fits so perfectly with another, and the whole thing functions as something more impressive than the most incredible timepiece any clockmaker has ever devised. For a person who believes in a specific incarnation of the divine may have human qualities, maybe even gender. For some, the divine has no gender or has all genders. Whatever the divine is, it's beyond human comprehension, but I think the importance of recognizing the divine is that struggling to reach beyond ourselves, that ultimately helps us to grow. By relating positively to that which is greater than ourselves, whatever name we give it, it gives us some place to go and something to become. In the movie Star Trek Nemesis, Captain Picard is essentially battling with a clone of himself. And Data at one point points out to him that what makes them different, what makes Captain Picard different from his clone, and Data different from the prototype of himself with which they're battling, is that they aspire to be more than they are. They aspire to reach beyond the definitions that have been assigned to them. From a certain perspective, life is about each of us finding the treasures within ourselves, the unique things within ourselves that are not like what is within anyone else. And finding those things and bringing them out and exploring them and developing them even when we don't really even know what they are. I have often described each person as being a sort of care package from God, that it's this box such as is often sent to college students that has a variety of things in it. And when a college student receives a care package from home, they don't know what will be in it. It's usually a variety of things. And so it's this exploration and this discovery. And there may be a new sweater, and then the next thing may be a candy bar, something sweet to enjoy that has no higher purpose per se, but it provides a moment of delight. The sweater may be something that is helpful to going through a long winter in a cold dorm room. Some of the dorm rooms that I lived in during my college years did get rather cold and drafty at times. All these different thoughtful sorts of things that somebody at home who really cares about you put into this box and sent to you without, just as a surprise, without any announcement or without even telling you what to expect. And so we spend our whole lives digging into the care package of ourselves and finding out what we have inside and what is uniquely us. At the present time, there are a lot of racial struggles going on too, and the racial struggles are not just about different races, but also about different nationalities. The perhaps perennial question of humanity, or at least in the past, who are the people who don't count? There is what I would consider an unhelpful hierarchical perception of humanity, that there are people who don't count. Sometimes it was particular races, sometimes it was people with disabilities, sometimes it was the elderly, sometimes it was people who had fewer economic resources, the poor. And the people who don't count would be put in expendable sorts of positions where they might die, they might suffer, they might struggle way more than the rest of the population did. The perspective that I have always advocated is that a person is a person is a person is a person after all. Thank you, Dr. Seuss, for putting that in his wonderful work, Horton Hears a Who. I think as Sister Who, this is not so much female impersonation. I think of Sister Who as a deeper level of personhood that precedes questions of gender and orientation. Figuring out what it is to be a who, to be a unique consciousness, and then if we can figure that out, what it is that makes my perspective absolutely unique, how is it that I see things differently than anyone else sees them, and how each of you sees things differently and understands things differently than anyone else will ever see and understand them. And to make the whole world whole, to bring a holistic, healthy completeness to it, takes all of us working together. Each different perspective is in a sense a divine gift, another piece to a huge jigsaw puzzle, and we don't know what the complete picture is until all the pieces are in place. And if we have excluded someone, whether because of their race or their age, their ability, their orientation, their religion, whatever reason, if we exclude them, it's like leaving a hole in the puzzle, a piece of the picture that we don't see and we don't understand and we don't know. When I was a child, I would often do jigsaw puzzles, and one of our first steps in assembling a jigsaw puzzle, myself and my siblings, was that we would first separate all the outside pieces and all the inside pieces, because if we could put the outside pieces together first, the outside pieces always had at least one edge that was flat, and so it was quicker and easier to at least figure out how big the puzzle was and give something to attach the inside pieces to. And once we had the outside, we would then be looking at all the inside pieces and find things that looked similar to the outside pieces so that we could begin to build connections toward the center. Or maybe we might take all the blue pieces and start assembling what would be the sky or the lake or whatever was in the picture. The curious thing about humanity as a jigsaw puzzle is that it's like we have no edge pieces. It's an ever-expanding puzzle, and yet, like a puzzle, Every piece is necessary. And without every piece, there's a whole. The strategy that had limited helpfulness was that we would separate between the edge pieces and the inside pieces, thinking that every piece had to be in one category or another. But by doing that, we don't see the individual pieces, at least not at that step. We had to look at the individual pieces later. In a similar sort of way, when humanity looks at people and assigns categories, the first thing we have to remember is that no individual piece is the embodiment of the category. There was no edge piece that could represent all edge pieces. There was no piece of the sky that could represent all pieces of the sky. Each individual piece was absolutely unique. There is no white person who can represent all white people. There is no black person who can represent all black people. Coming to terms with a racial category is in some ways the ongoing struggle and philosophical debate of integrating Martin Luther King with Malcolm X, of integrating diverse perspectives within each nationality and within each racial classification. Even within Christianity, it extends all the way from Pentecostal Protestants to Eastern Orthodox and High Mass on Christmas Eve in the Roman Catholic Church. That's quite a lot of diversity. So to say that anything, who is the one person who will represent all of Christianity? There isn't one. There's no one who can encompass that much diversity. Each person must be addressed as an individual. Something I've mentioned in some of my past shows is that actually, well, not late in life, but well into adulthood, shall we say, I was finally diagnosed as having what is often referred to as high-functioning autism, that I am autistic. My brain operates in a very different way from a lot of the population. Autism is a condition that's more and more coming to the fore, but the thing that is commonly said now is that when you meet one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, which is why it's referred to as a spectrum, the autism spectrum, because every single case is unique. And in some ways, the way all these new diagnoses of autism are coming out, and no one has quite figured out why yet, what is the reason for what causes autism. But the number of new cases is increasing and increasing and increasing, and it's becoming a societal challenge. From another perspective, though, a constructive perspective, I would say it's kind of a blessing and an invitation from God to remember, finally, that we are ultimately all individuals. That as soon as you treat a person as if they were the embodiment of a category, there are unique qualities of that person that will be overlooked and that will be pushed aside, and contributions that that person could make that will not be made because you're expecting them to act like the category instead of to act like themselves. I was in my mid-20s before I discovered that I am gay and that I am a man who loves other men instead of falling in love with a woman and in the normal heterosexist dominant sort of pattern that society frequently has. The estimate I most frequently hear is that about 10% of the population are homosexual, are gay or lesbian. And then of course beyond that we also have transgender people and intersex people now also. Humanity is not just the male and female duality that so many previous generations assumed. There is a diversity that can be celebrated, and each of those perspectives has something unique and empowering to contribute, as long as we don't expect any individual to be the embodiment of the category. There is no gay person who can represent all gay people. There is no disabled person who can represent all disabled people. We are each unique individuals. What humanity needs to move toward are new systems that have the ability to bend and flex and integrate all the diverse individuals that it includes. when we have one group fighting another group based on a categorical label, everybody loses, because there, in both sides, there are unique contributions and unique perspectives that individuals can contribute to the complete health of humanity. There are artistic perspectives and literary perspectives and scientific perspectives, governmental perspectives. So many wonderful things that I believe God created to empower humanity to deal with every challenge it would ever face. Often problems happen, tragedies happen, and people ask, why doesn't God do something? I believe God does. God sends people who have the unique gifts necessary to handle the task. But all too often they are met with demands for conformity, that you have to be just like all of us, instead of investigating what are the qualities this unique person has. Scientifically or even socially, figuratively, however, whatever way you want to look at it, humanity is ultimately all one family. We can trace migrations back through time. We can trace the expansions of people, and it would get to a point, and then the people group would split into two and go off in different directions, and new forms of society would develop. And later they would perhaps forget that they had common ancestors and begin fighting each other, which makes no sense, because we are ultimately all one family. There are now also conflicts happening between certain professions and certain people groups, between, for example, law enforcement and various groups of people. But that has pretty much been throughout time. Going back to that question of who is the person that doesn't matter, and of course, as Sister Who, I say everyone matters. We need to stop having this debate. Because of all the times when some dominant group of society decided that that group or this group or that group didn't matter, suddenly law enforcement would be championed, or would be championed, assigned, commanded, ordered to treat those people as somehow being less. And each officer would then have to decide, do I follow the orders I was given, or do I resign from my position because I cannot do this terrible thing that they're asking me to do? And if I do resign, does that throw me into poverty because I will have no other way of supporting myself and supporting my family? It becomes a very manipulative sort of interconnected dilemma. The more I learn about life, the more it seems to me that it is not so much about competing for all these different things as it is remembering that we are all family, and that it is absolutely true that in reality, it is to be healthy, it has to be embraced as a reality. That reality is this vast web of symbiotic relationships, of interdependent and interconnected relationships. When we look at the conflicts in history, really it's not about what the identities of the perpetrators and victims were. It's a recognition that various groups of people have displaced other groups at various points in time. No one has clean hands in the sense of who were the oppressors and who were the victims. At some point, everyone has been an oppressor, and at some other point, everyone has been a victim. And so we need to stop trying to fix the past and figure out how to align the present, how to find within each person our greatest humanity, our greatest capacities for love and wisdom, our greatest capacities for collaborating and being symbiotic instead of competing and thinking that I can only survive if it's at your expense. I can only be better if it's at your expense. There is no need for there to be winners and losers. I have houseplants in my house. They breathe oxygen. They exhale oxygen. I exhale carbon dioxide. We have a symbiotic relationship, each of us providing what the other needs that the other cannot provide for themselves. There are so many things throughout human societies that are absolutely dependent upon symbiotic relationships. the farmer providing the food and the doctor providing the medical attention that the farmer may need from time to time so that the farmer can continue producing food. Economically, horrendous imbalances have occurred because it is irrational. Makes no sense. It is not intelligent to argue who is more important, the doctor or the farmer. Both are absolutely essential. In the world of the theater, there is a common saying that there are no small parts, only small players. The idea being that whether you have a leading role or whether you have a brief walk-on with a single line, everything has to happen at the right time in the right way. The jigsaw puzzle has to all be fit together with each piece in place, or the picture is incomplete and the whole system breaks down. The well-paid chief executive officer in some business, in some corporation, can only do his job if the janitor empties the wastebasket and the receptionist directs the incoming phone calls to him appropriately, and the mailroom personnel delivers his incoming mail and takes his outgoing mail and ships it to where it needs to go. There is no CEO that can run a corporation all by himself or herself. It is interdependency to the extent that anyone in one level of administration devalues or ignores the needs of anyone in any other part. The whole system begins to break down. If the medical needs of the farmer are not tended to as the farmer needs them regardless of the cost, the farmer will not be there to create food, and there will be no food on the doctor's table or the CEO's table or the king's table or whatever table you want to identify. Every human being, regardless of categorization, needs clean water to drink, clean air to breathe, healthy food to eat. It is not about deciding who doesn't matter. And it would be extremely arrogant and short-sighted for anyone to say that this person or that person doesn't matter. Because as we begin to track where did these inventions come from, there are great many inventions that humanity as a whole are absolutely dependent upon, that were discovered or invented or developed specifically by someone who was, from some perspective, a marginalized person. They may have been a person with a disability. They may have been a person with a different orientation or a different religion or a different race. I don't know if this is exactly a perfect example, but one that comes to mind during World War II, it has often been described that what allowed the tide of the war to turn and a better victory to be achieved is when someone was finally able to decipher the communication code used by the Nazi regime. That person was a gay man. Because he deciphered the code, and a lot of the initial ideas he came up with in deciphering that code were actually foundational to the development of the computer. One could say that to some extent it would have been much, much more difficult to create computers without the contributions of Alan Turing. The problem is that as valuable and as essential as his contribution was at that point in time, when the war was over, he was given a medal for doing this, but when the war was over, he was forgotten. And later, because the government got involved in homophobic oppression of people, looking at Alan Turing as a category instead of as the individual who performed this incredible inventive feat during World War II, they classified him as gay and saw him as nothing more and harassed him so much and forced him into drug regimens and so forth, to the extent that he ultimately committed suicide. Tragic. I suggest to you, though, that whether the issue is orientation or race, whether we're talking about the development of the Harlem Dance Theater or any number of other incredible developments, there are children and young people and even adults who are in the beginning stages of making phenomenal contributions to human progress. But if we do not see their individuality, if we do not value them as the leaders and inventors and creators of our future, they may never get the nurturing that they need to make the contributions from which all of us will benefit. Especially in times of transition. The thing I keep coming back to again and again and again as I talk to people is that what is most important now is to rediscover each other, because in the final analysis we may be the best resource that we have. The most essential point, I guess, of times of transition is to remember that they are times of choice. And as has frequently been noted of late, the problem of choosing the lesser of two evils is that evil always wins. We need to start making choices of good, choices reaching for the good within ourselves and within each other.